everybody, how's it going? It's the second Tuesday of September, so we have Scale Success Reptile Podcast, and tonight we have David with Tiki Geckos. I wanted to bring on. He's our first gecko breeder on, so it's on a pretty special one for this year. And he's also a Miami local guy, at least South Florida, right?
South Florida, yeah.
Yeah. So he's South Florida local guy. I just wanted to give everybody a shout out again for being on here. Shout out a couple of the people that's on here: Bosa Reptiles, Eric's Morph Factory, North Star Exotics, Ruba Exotics. Thanks, guys, for jumping on and joining us tonight. Also, want to remind everybody that I have a partnership with Husbandry Pro. Take your husbandry care taken note taken to the next level. So there's a link in our bio. Join and do a 30-day free trial and stuff like that. We're gonna do this one. We're gonna just start off with this one. And let's get to know David. We talked a little bit, a couple of seconds in the background, David. Like I said, you're from South Florida. Where in South Florida did you grow up?
So, well, I was born in Venezuela, but I came to South Florida when I was about 10 years old. First, we moved to Orlando, and then we moved to South Florida. I actually lived in Coral Springs for most of my childhood. And then, I've been in South Florida basically 22 years, my whole life, basically. So I've been in Broward most of the time, but now I'm in Palm Beach County.
Gotcha. Yeah. How old are you now?
I'm 30 years old.
30 years old. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Yeah. So how long you been doing reptiles?
So as a hobby, I've had reptiles basically my whole life, man. Ever since I was in elementary school, I've had some sort of reptile. My first reptile ever was a bearded dragon. But as a business, it really started to become like more of a professional, business or a career, I would say, when I was in 2011 is when I actually started it. And, I had the business for a while, but it didn't really take off. Well, not that it didn't take off, but I wasn't full time in this up until about like 6 or 7 years ago. So about 6 years ago, I would say, when I started actually full time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what was the change of just starting off, I guess, testing the waters, and what made that change 6 or 7 years ago to really pushing hard on it?
Well, in the beginning, I didn't think it was possible to make a living just entirely based on this hobby. I thought it was more like a supplemental income type thing. But I started working at Underground Reptiles, and I saw the numbers that they were doing and the potential of you could actually, make a living out of this. You don't need any additional income. You could make a really good living out of this. And that's when my mind opened up, and I was like, oh, okay, so I could just dedicate myself to this and make it my whole life, my job. And that's what really took it off. That's what took me to the next level when I decided to stop doing everything else and just focus on this. Because I've done real estate. I was a Muay Thai coach. I've worked at, retail, fresh market. I've done so many different jobs.
Yeah.
But when I decided to stop everything basically and just focus on this, that's when it took it to the next level.
Nice. So you say this is your dream job then, right?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
There's nothing else I'd rather be doing.
Oh, yeah, man. And it's pretty amazing because now that I'm doing this full time too, I tell my friends, right, that have known me for years, and I was into the construction business for many years since I moved down here to South Florida. And they're like, what are you? Well, he's like, are you sure that's what you're doing? I was like, yeah, man. It's hard for people to believe that you can actually make, maybe not be millionaires and stuff like that, but you can make a comfortable, life, for yourself in the reptile hobby.
Yeah, it's especially people who don't even know reptiles can be pets. That's the hardest people that's the people that have the hardest time believing that this is actual career. But especially as I think social media and honestly the COVID years in general have like taken the reptile hobby to another level, and
Mhm.
it's allowed more people to come into this thing and just make a living off of it. If you're serious about it and you do this because of the passion, it's definitely possible.
I agree. I agree, man. I mean, I'm brand new into it, especially doing it as a business. But I've seen you at a couple shows and stuff like that. Do you do? I mean, I've seen you at a lot of shows. Are you constantly doing shows, or do you have like a season you do shows, or you just do them all year round?
So, so before COVID, we would do at the very least one show a month, and most of the time it'd be at least two shows a month. After COVID, the reptile shows, there was a time that the reptile shows were really bad because COVID obviously scared a lot of people, but they were doing like time blocks and just like a limited amount of people in those time blocks, and it wasn't as profitable. So I stopped doing reptile shows, but at the same time, like business online was just taking off. So it just didn't even make sense to spend time going to reptile shows. And I just dedicated basically everything to the online aspect of it. But nowadays, not because this year has been a little bit slower, I've started doing reptile shows again. But yeah, it's honestly this is the year after the whole COVID, like kind of like slowed down the reptile shows. This is the year that we have started doing reptile shows more frequently. So we're doing at least maybe like once a month at least. We try to do at least once a month.
Yeah. So just this weekend, I've ended my first official show as our own company. I've done a couple
Yeah,
shows with our friend Eslin, just helping him out and stuff like that. So it
yeah,
was interesting, and it was in our hometown, so it was almost dumb not to do it,
yeah, exactly.
So it was a Repticon, and we were talking a little bit backstage, and you know it was a little slow on foot traffic, but it seems like you made enough to make it worthwhile the weekend to come down, right? Um,
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, this was you said it's your first show vending by yourself.
mhm,
So this is Miami's been a very slow show.
mhm.
It's just like we were saying backstage, I think they just need to do a lot more marketing. But as far as like, the good reptile shows to go to that are definitely worth driving up to, think about Tampa, Orlando, obviously Daytona if you ever want to do that. It's a little bit more expensive to get into that one, but
Mhm.
it's one of the bigger reptile shows in the state of Florida. And honestly, recently the Reptilian Nation shows have done so far. They've done two shows in Florida. They're going to do about once a year, and those have been like a breath of fresh air. Like they do great social media advertising. You get a crap ton of new people through the doors, so you're going to be, it's a lot busier, and those are some of the good shows for sure.
Yeah, I went to the Reptilian Nation. It was earlier this year, right, in West
Yeah,
Palm. Yeah, and I
yeah,
really enjoyed it. It was cool to see a little difference in the shows and stuff like that.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I definitely plan to do a lot more, and just push my name out there and meet new people and stuff like that. Because like you said, the online presence, it is slowing down, and I feel like if you're going to continue with anybody that's selling reptiles and stuff like that is going to continue with progressing and keeping their business open, they're going to have to start doing more
yeah.
shows and do online.
Yeah, that's a good point. When things slow down online, the reptile shows are usually still, decent. But by the way, I was going to mention there's another show coming up in October next month here in West Palm Beach, also called Scales Expo,
Hmm.
and it's being set up by my buddy Ryan, and he's having. I think he said that he's having some of the people that worked on the Reptilian Nation show, the advertisement. They're going to help him out to advertise it. So it should be a pretty good show. If you can, you should probably vend that show. There's
I
gonna be
am. I
it's gonna be a fish.
actually. Yeah,
Oh, you're
I
doing
am.
it?
I talked to him yesterday morning, actually. Yeah,
Oh, dope. All right,
yeah,
cool, man.
yeah.
I'll see you
So
there.
yeah, if you guys are in West Palm area, definitely stop by. And
Yeah.
see us and Tikis. You're gonna be vending.
Yeah, we're gonna be vending.
Yeah. And then they're gonna have some like influencers too have a booth there as well. Seems like it.
Yeah,
Um,
I think they're gonna have Chandler, Tyler Nolan,
mhm,
and I think Paul Cafaro.
yeah.
So it's gonna be good.
Yeah. I've never been to like because I guess it's gonna be like fish and reptiles. I've never been to a fish show. So it's gonna be an interesting combination of both under one roof.
Yeah, I think I've never been to a fish show either, actually. So I'm excited to see what it's gonna be
Yeah.
like.
Yeah, man. It'll be really cool. So, like I said, if you're in the West Palm area or you want to drive down, stop by. It seems like it's going to be a really cool show.
Yeah,
It's. Do you remember the dates on that? Let me see if I can pull it up real quick.
I think I'll tell you right now. Hold on. Yeah, it's October 21st.
Yep, October 21st,
20,
21st.
21st and 22nd.
Yeah, South Florida Fairgrounds. Yep.
Yeah, in West Palm Beach. That's right.
It's gonna be. Yeah, seems like it's gonna be a good time there. Um, yeah, and I also want to do Reptilian Nation, so I'm looking to that because like I said, I did enjoy it attending, and I helped Eslin vend last year too, or earlier
Yeah.
this year. So I did really enjoy that show as well.
How
Um,
long have you known Iceland?
I met Eslin a little over a year now.
Oh, okay.
I bought a hognose from him, well, a pair, and then just started picking his brain and then grew into a friendship, and you know,
Yeah, I
um,
know. I know Espen for a lot of years, man, and he's one of the guys, one of the original breeders here in South Florida with Crested Geckos and stuff. And he helped me out so much in the beginning because, well, when I was coming up, he was already, he was already doing this for a couple of years. He's been doing reptiles for a long, long time.
mhm,
So shout out to
yeah,
him, man. He's
for
awesome.
sure,
He's
man.
always helping.
Yeah, and he's always willing to help someone. Like
Oh, bro, yeah,
I'll get phone calls from him. It's like, hey, I have some person that lives close to, because he lives, up where you used to live, and I live
yeah,
further down south. So I'll get messages and be like, hey, I got this person that lives close to you. Can you give him a hand and give him some information, stuff like that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
he's always one of those guys that definitely, if you got any questions about multiple species, like you said, geckos, he did chameleons,
yeah.
he's done
He helped us
Brazilian
out.
boas. Yeah.
Yeah, Brazilian rainbows. He's done so much, and he does hog dogs now. He's exotic fire hogs. But yeah, there's a lot. There's a morph of crested geckos like called the super stripes, and those he was one of the first people who worked with them and made really amazing looking super stripes back then. And he just had a ton of nice red geckos and all kinds of stuff. But with the panther chameleons too, he helped us with that a bunch because Manny was getting into breeding them, and he's the one who basically taught us how to do that. So yeah,
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like, I say it all the time. I'm really lucky that I started my reptile journey here in South Florida, and even with the hognose and meeting Aslan and a couple of the other hognose local breeders here, because I feel like the South Florida reptile community, at least of what I've been exposed to, everybody helps everyone. Everybody's looking out for everyone, so it's been pretty good. You know.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I agree.
Yeah. You know, talking about like sales and business stuff that I was looking at your link tree. You have a website. Do you do most of your sales through the website? Do you use Morph Market and stuff like that, or
No, most of my sales are through my website.
through your website?
And yeah, and a little piece of advice to anybody that is visiting or even yourself is build a strong following for your website and don't rely on Morph Market. Morph Market is great. Don't get me wrong. Don't ban me, Darian. But but you always want to have you know you want to have a grasp on your customer base. You don't want to have them be Morph Market customers that happen to find you. You want them to be directly in contact with you because you know let's say you do something wrong or you get banned or whatever, you don't want to solely rely on that branch. And the same thing when it goes to social media. I say this I say this all the time, but we've had our Instagram account shut down 4 times now. And if all of my eggs were in one Instagram basket, I would have no eggs. So you got to make sure that you diversify a little bit and try to build your own thing.
Yeah. And that's very interesting because you know, being in different businesses before and stuff like that, I totally agree with you. You can't just solely rely on any one thing for, we're talking about business, not just as a reptile keeper or someone that's, breeding as just a hobby that's not, um, relying this to put food on your table. You
Yeah,
can't rely on just one source of, material, source of marketplace, shipping. You got to have multiple sources because as a business, you got to be able to move. Depends
yeah,
on, like you said, one company something happens with a company, and you're just tied to that one company. Then that happens. It trickles down to you.
yep, that's right.
Yeah,
You
it's
got to
it's
be able to pivot.
you do, and I think doing these podcasts and doing shows is a great part of networking with everybody in the community. So that's another reason I at least want to do more shows too, to just meet more people and network. And man, this weekend, a lot of just people that were there for the show coming to the general public, that were maybe interested in Hognose. And I was telling them, oh, I'm local down here. I'm like 15 minutes away and stuff like that. They're like, I didn't know there was a reptile Hognose breeder in Miami. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
so like
And you'll get those people that they don't buy from you at the show, but
mhm.
then you'll get a call maybe like a week or two later, and they say, "Oh, okay, now I'm ready to get my hog nose." So it's always good to do those shows for that reason.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Especially I think in your hometown. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Um. So you've been doing reptile. You've been in the reptile world for a very long time. You see it like we say 11 years old. Now you're 30 years old, right?
Pretty much,
Yeah.
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 hmm
Um. What species did you start off with?
Well, so my first reptile ever was a bearded dragon, but the species I started with, as far as breeding goes, and like
Hmm.
taking it to more than just a hobby, was the crested geckos. That's what originally started Tiki's geckos.
Okay. Where did the Tikis come from? Where did the name Tiki come from? Seems like we might have. Okay, there we go. Did you hear
Sorry
me?
about that. What happened? No,
Where did the
I didn't
name
hear that
Tiki
last
come from?
question. So when I first moved from Orlando to Coral Springs, I had this shirt that said Tiki Palooza, and then we would go and I would hang out with my buddies in the complex, and one of them was like, I don't like the name David. I'm gonna call you Tiki, and that name just stuck, bro. It from everybody in the complex started calling me Tiki. Then, because they went to the same school, everybody at school started calling me Tiki, and then everybody at the gym started calling me Tiki. And then I'm like, it was just stuck. It was like one of those nicknames that
Yeah.
stuck.
Yeah.
And I was like, Tiki's Geckos kind of rings. So I was like, that's what I'm gonna name the business.
That's pretty cool, man. That's a good
Yeah,
story for a company name.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
personal, you know.
yeah, exactly.
I can see when I asked you the question, it put a smile on your face. It brought like good memories back to you.
Yeah, exactly, man.
That's
I've had
pretty
that
cool.
name since I was a kid, and
Yeah.
like you say, it's personal because this is not like, I don't know. Some people may see 100,000 followers on Instagram or whatever and think I'm a huge business, but it's not like that at all. It's like we're a small business, you know, and this is very close to me. Everybody that works for me is like my family, basically. So it's very perfect. This business, I'm like hands on here, and I everything that happens through here, it goes through my hands. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's very very
It-
personal.
and it's very interesting because I was taking a business class earlier this year, and in the business class they talked about like it's catered to the general corporate world basically, but they talked about like expanding and coming hands off your business. But then once I
Yeah.
started seeing like the formulas and the process, I was like, I don't know how it would be possible for a reptile breeder to take that path, to be fully
Yeah.
hands off. You know.
When I first started, my
Mhm.
main goal was to be one of the biggest crested gecko breeders in terms of quantity. Now, I've over the years, and more specifically the last 2 or 3 years, I've realized that that's not what I want to do anymore because of that same reason. You start to be, uh, I don't do like the feeding of the geckos or anything like that anymore. I don't do the
Yeah.
cleaning and stuff. So I'm not as hands on as I would like to. And that's because the business has grown to a certain level that I can't be doing that anymore. I have to dedicate my time to something else.
Hmm.
But one of the beauties about kind of like when you're starting off or having a smaller business is that you're hands on with everything, all the animals you get to touch, you get to see, every day you're feeding them and stuff. And it's what we originally got into this for. And now I
Yeah.
wouldn't change what's going on now. I love what we do, but at the same time, now I'm like, okay, now I understand because I've also, been enlightened to some of the other bigger breeders because I've met them, I've gone to their facilities,
Hmm.
so I've seen that side of the hobby, and I'm like, okay, well, that's not exactly what I want to do anymore. I want to focus on just breeding as high end animals as possible, and to do that, you're gonna have to downscale a little bit, but at the end of the day, at least why I got into this and why I started breeding crested geckos was because I wanted to make really cool morphs. I wanted to make animals that people would just, their jaws would drop when they saw them, basically. And that's what I lost sight of that, a couple of years ago. But I'm back on like, okay, no, it's no longer it's quantity, it's quality over quantity,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
I definitely think that's a good business model for any type of business. You know, and it's like like I would say, it's comparing. Either you want designer or you want the generic stuff, right? Like
yeah,
similarities like that. Designer
yeah.
stuff is not put out in bulk, really.
Yeah, exactly. And not just that, but it's like the capitalist, system, which I love capitalism, don't get me wrong, but it's just like grow every year, more,
Yeah.
more, be more successful, dot, dot, dot. But these are animals, and sometimes like more is not better with when it comes to animals because if you have, you know, 6,000 geckos, you're not gonna be able to give those animals the best life possible. So, there's still not to say that these big breeders aren't ethical or good or whatever. There's it's a yin and the yang of the business. Some people have to do that. If there wasn't those, super big breeders that produce 10,000 geckos a year, then there would be the business wouldn't be like it is today. And I don't think
Mhm.
people get that. There wouldn't be, you need those geckos to go to Petco. You need geckos at Petco. You need geckos at these pet stores that people are going to go in there, see it one day, and then just fall in love. And it's going to open up their mind to this whole hobby. So, yeah, I think it is quality over quantity. There's like a certain amount of like, like the designer morphs and stuff are always going to be rare, and they should be, but there's it's a necessary there's a you there's it's necessary to have both worlds basically.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Talking about him earlier, he just jumped on and said, as I just said, crested geckos are one of the gateway reptiles.
yeah, it's true. Crested
Yeah.
geckos, ball pythons, all that, bearded dragons.
Hmm. Yeah. It starts. Yeah, like we've all been bitten by that bug. Starts off with one reptile, and then it's hard not to grow into a larger collection, or at least a couple, right? Um,
Yeah,
and that's an interesting point of view. You're talking about, like, it is a necessary part of like the hobby, where having animals in these big box stores, right? Um,
yeah,
us sometimes as breeders, we talk about like, oh, buy only directly from the breeders. Hopefully, maybe these big box stores shouldn't have reptiles in the store because they're not the best at providing information for the people buying it and stuff like that. But most people do go to these big box stores and then get exposed because that's all they know,
yeah,
right? And then it opens that gateway to start researching. And then you find Morph Market one day, and all these
Yeah,
other,
exactly.
reptile Instagrams and stuff like that. Yeah. It's,
The solution is not to say big pet stores can't keep reptiles because they're giving out wrong information and this, that, and the other. The solution is to educate those stores. The solution is to educate the people working in the stores, or the the company and its in itself. Okay, this is, you don't feed your crested gecko baby food. There's this product now called Repassion. That's how you feed it, and things like that. So I think there's people are quick to judge when it comes to like those big, if you get your gecko or ball python from Petco. But my first crested geckos that I officially got were from Petco. So I
yeah.
see I see the importance of it
Yeah.
for sure.
And it's interesting because, like, you made me think about like my first set of reptiles. I grew up in New Jersey, and I got my first iguana and turtle like at a swap meet.
Yeah,
Like it was some guy just set up with tubs, and I picked one up and went home.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
pretty interesting to think about that, or like to think those memories back where how far we've come to as well. To see
yeah.
some of like the you know really cool like mom and pop reptile shops that are out there, because there are some really cool ones out there that are doing it
Oh
right.
yeah. Oh yeah, man, for sure. There are stores that have been around for a long, long time, and they have brought generations up. Like underground reptiles, talking about underground reptiles, they have
Mhm.
brought up generations of different reptile people, educators, influencers, like, and they've all gone, especially here in South Florida and in Broward. Man, the a who's who of a list of people that you see on the internet talking about reptiles, they've gone through them. They've worked there, or they've done business with them, or somehow are related to them. So yeah,
So yeah, and that's the thing. Like, there's those cornerstones of like the certain communities that you know without them, maybe the reptile community in South Florida wouldn't be there, or maybe it would, but it would be a different scene, or wouldn't be as big.
yeah,
But
it'd be
it's like one of those
completely
things.
different.
Yeah, it's one of the things you never know, right? To what would have happened if they weren't there. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and then you talked about you know not getting such a big collection, or downsizing how much you're breeding and stuff. Have you figured out around like your average of how many animals you want to produce a year to be able to like stay within your goal nowadays, that you want to be more quality over quantity?
No, I'm not. I'm not going for like a target number of animals produced a year. I'm
Hmm.
more going off of like the animals I want to work with. So, for example, like I want to work with super Dalmatians. I want to work with lily whites, with cappuccinos, with all these different Moors, and I want to work with them at the highest of levels. So, whatever you know, I I also want to keep track of lineage better and stuff, because that's
Hmm.
also like the way, if you're doing high end, if you're doing the designer morphs, people are going to want to know exactly the lineage of them. And the way we do it now is like we have one male in with 3 or 4 females. So we know who the male is, but sometimes we don't know exactly who the female is. Uh,
Okay.
but it's not necessarily like how many animals I want to produce a year and that's my target number. It's more like, okay, I see this group. I'm not really into this group so much. I'm just like breeding these because it's like an easy gecko to sell. I'm more gonna focus on, I like this group, I like this look, I'm gonna do more of this,
Hmm.
you know?
Okay. I'm really new into the Crested Gecko world, and like the last couple months, I've seen some stuff on your page and some other people pages that have really caught my eye. And the Dalmatian, that like super Dalmatian, I think that's what really attracts me to the geckos. And with the red spotting too,
Yeah, a
I
lot
think
of people
that
like
was
that.
really cool to see. Um, Tell me, is that how's genetics work and like morphs work with the crested geckos?
So it's similar to a lot of other things. The difference is that we, in the crested gecko world, we didn't start off with a base We didn't start off with a normal crested gecko,
Mhm.
right? So in the beginning, there was a lot of confusion as to what the Morse were, or a lot of people said it was polygenic, and it was like you pair up two geckos and who knows what will come out, you know. But it's not like that. It's just we didn't have a good understanding of how the genetics worked before. There are the incomplete dominant mutations, the recessive mutations, you know, dominant mutations, and we see that throughout the different morphs. But nowadays, especially like the last 2 or 3 years, we have dialed in into crested gecko genetics, and we have been able to just really pinpoint exactly how this mutation works, how these traits are passed down. And for anybody that cares to learn more about the crested gecko morphs and stuff, I recommend you check out, well, aside from our YouTube channel, we do a bunch of morph videos, but there's, you Google LM reptiles, little monster reptiles, and they have like a article called Foundation Genetics for the crested geckos, and it breaks down every single morph, and it tells you if it's incomplete dominant, you know how it works. It describes the morph for you. So it's like an awesome tool for anybody getting into crested geckos nowadays. A lot of people, you know, especially even some of the old school breeders like that still aren't accepting it the whole way, but then, you know, then you do the numbers and you prove it out, and they're like, okay, and then they accept this, but they don't accept the other thing. But yeah, if any new breeders or people interested in the genetics of the crested geckos, I highly recommend checking that out.
Okay, I'm gonna look it up and I'm gonna add it to the description when we post this video for the replays.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
you guys can,
Yeah,
yeah, if you guys are interested in seeing, I'm gonna go take a look at it. So I definitely want
yeah.
to, as I told you the show this weekend, I definitely want to grab a pair here in the near future. So I want to at least have a pair for pets and see where it goes. You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's how it starts.
that's how it starts. Yeah, yeah. I was looking
one
at a
get
couple.
one gecko's a liability, two geckos are assets. So keep that in
That's
mind.
right.
Get a pair.
That's right. It's so true, man. You know, and then talking about like genetic stuff that with breeding, is there any breeding tips you will give like somebody that's just starting off? Like any, like let's say three major things you would tell somebody breeding off, starting off with breeding geckos.
I it cut out, but I heard, is there any breeding tips that for people starting off?
Yeah.
My number one tip that I always give is do work with the animals that you personally like. Don't go and say, oh, what's selling right now? What's hot right now? And go with that, because that never works out. The market goes up and down and you know, in circles and whatever. And, you know, 10 years ago, a phantom, a dark phantom crested gecko, which is like a patternless, like a dark patternless crested gecko, was like a wholesale gecko, was like $10.
Mhm.
Nowadays, those geckos sell for like $500 because nobody wanted them, nobody bred them, and now they're rare again. Now they're rare, and everybody focused on breeding what was rare back then, and now there's plenty of that in the market, but there's none of the other stuff that wasn't rare back then. So it's like just
Yeah.
work on what you like the best and focus on making the highest quality geckos possible in whatever you like. And
Yeah.
trust me, if you like it, there's other people out there that like it as well.
For sure, yeah, and I think that's, you know, I mean, you see that in everything, in fashion, music, and stuff. That I mean, look at it. Like I see my kids dressing with clothes that I used to dress when I was young, and like you know, just like the styles coming back and stuff like that. So I think it's a
It's cyclical.
repetition, you know,
Yeah.
of a cycle, yeah, of that. Um, and then earlier today, before you know, looking around Morph Market and stuff like that for, you know, I just put, you know, the highest price up of geckos, and man, there's some really expensive geckos out there. You know,
What kind of prices were you looking at?
I just put on Morph Market, you know, show highest price first. You know, I just want to
Yeah,
see
yeah,
what the market looked like. I mean, I
yeah,
have it up right now, and there's a Sable X Lily White for 15 grand. You know,
yeah,
so I was surprised. You know, and I don't know why I get surprised because the reptile world is, it's like almost, when I explain to my friends that are not reptile people, I explain to them, it's the market is by what people are willing to pay for, almost like classic cars,
Anything.
collectible paints and stuff like that. What are people willing to pay for it? You know,
Exactly.
and then to me, I do consider this like us breeding morphs and genetics and like designer stuff is like part of a visual art too. Bringing
Yeah,
this stuff together.
100%. 100. One of the coolest things about doing this is that you could have in your mind an idea of what you want a gecko to look like that doesn't exist, and if you know what you're doing, you could eventually get there.
Mhm.
So that's what I really like about this too, is like you see a gecko and it inspires you, it influences you to think about another gecko that you think would be cool in the future. And then through selective breeding and you know and understanding genetics, you could basically get there and you can create your own piece of art, because there's geckos out there that if you show me just the gecko, a picture of the gecko, I could tell you exactly who produced that animal, you know, because every breeder, at least that's done it for some time, has like their little touch on the
Mm,
geckos. So you see geckos that it takes time to develop that eye, but you see geckos that before you tell me exactly who produced it, I could tell you, oh, that probably comes from this guy. That probably comes from this guy. And even in my own collection, I could see babies, and before I look at the label, I could tell, oh, this comes from this group and this mom and this dad, and it comes from that parent. So that's what I like about it. It's literally like an art form.
yeah, it really is, man. Um, so like with projects, what are your goal projects right now that you're really working towards, that in the next year or two that you really want to produce that you haven't produced yet?
There's a bunch of stuff.
Mhm,
So there with the Asiatic crested geckos,
mhm,
we recently just started producing lily white Asiatics, which was one of my goals for the longest. But now I want to do Asiatics that are, so most of the Asiatics out there are pretty bland. They don't have much going on unless they're a lily white Asiatic. But I want to make Asiatics that are extreme harlequins, Asiatics that are high white, that are not lily white. I also want to do, lily white sable combos like the one that you saw that went for 17,000 or whatever. I want to do that. There's a bunch of other stuff like the tangerine stuff that I just want to keep refining. And I mean, bro, I could go on and on. There's
yeah.
so much to do. And that's why I kind of
That,
want to have like that's why I kind of like having a bigger facility where I don't need to have a billion geckos, but I could have every project I want, at least
mhm.
one group of that, So yeah, we're gonna do it all.
That's cool, man. That's good. That's good. And then for like stuff you're producing, are you producing pet quality stuff too, and then like high end? Are you doing the full range?
Yeah, yeah, I do the full range right now. And
Okay.
honestly, I think I will always do the full range to an extent, but my pet quality stuff is gonna come, it's gonna shorten up
Mhm.
uh for the reasons we were talking about before. But I like that. I like being able to sell a 10-year-old kid his first gecko at a reptile show, I don't wanna price myself out of those customers because I like that interaction because I see myself in that interaction a lot of the
Yeah.
times. And there's kids that come up to our table at Repticon that like I think I'm gonna school them. I'm like, tell them about the gecko, and they've already done the research. They already know
Hmm.
everything. So
Yep.
that kind of stuff, it always gives me like an extra boost of energy because these guys, like these kids with the internet, they got they got
Yeah, man.
the whole hobby on their hand. They could do whatever
Yeah,
they want.
for sure.
They're so
Yeah.
knowledgeable.
I mean, I tell all the time. My daughters got me into Hognose,
That's
because
awesome.
they were watching Snake Discovery nonstop for years, and they kept asking. And at that point, I didn't want, like, we have dogs, cat, stuff like that. I was like, I don't want another pet, because it's gonna fall on
Yeah,
me at the end of the day, like
yeah,
any parent, right? And then eventually, I was like, okay, cool, let's get one. And then that's what started the whole, journey. But
And
this weekend, yeah.
and now you got 100 hard goes
Uh,
behind you.
for sure, yeah, yeah, man. And they were there this weekend with me, and a lot of people give me that compliment, like, "Wow, they know a lot." They know genetics, they know the breeding process and stuff like that. Because that was one of the deals, like you said, your business, you have family working with you. That was one of the things, like when I started getting into the Hognose and I fell in love with them. Um, from the get go, my daughters wanted to breed. From she's like, "Come on, let's get a pair, let's breed them." Um, and when I
You better
decided
give
to
them
go,
equity, bro.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and then when I decided, I was like, "Okay, let's do it." That was one of the deals. Like, you guys have to be part of it.
Yeah,
If you guys really want to do it, it's going to be a long term. Eventually, I understand they're going to get older and stuff for that, and I'm going to be doing it alone. But for now, it's a
yeah.
family all the time. But this weekend we had a two sisters come up to a display case and was just looking and stuff like that, and we were my wife was asking them questions, and they're like like, do you have gecko, do you have a hog nose, like we really want one, but everything's out of your price range in your case, and they're like, our dad gave us an X amount budget. My wife was like, okay, well, we can do this gecko for, I mean, you can do this hognose for that. And like 10 minutes later, they were dragging their dad down to get their hognose. They're the happiest little girls that weekend, you know.
That's awesome, man.
So
Yeah, yeah.
that's yeah.
Yeah, that kind of stuff is what makes this more than just like a hobby, at least, or a job, I should say. What makes
Mhm.
this more than just a job and stuff is like just seeing that kind of enthusiasm from a little kid, that that you were once that little kid, and to think about how that's going to affect their life, and eventually they might end up on a podcast just like this talking about
Yeah.
reptiles just like us.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. It's literally fueling the next generation of reptile people.
Yeah,
We
man.
need more.
Yeah, we need a whole army, man.
Yeah.
I last year my oldest daughter's in middle school and she's in like a medical magnet program. And last year, the first year, the sixth graders do like a animal like introduction to like very animal medicine, animal like biology and stuff like that. And I got with a teacher, and she let me come in and did like a presentation on hognose. Um, and this year we went to open house. She goes, "Hey, I convinced the school we're gonna get a hognose now for the program." So that was a really cool moment for me too. Now, like all these kids that go through this program, there's going to be a hog nose there.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's really
Yeah.
dope.
Um, what other species are you working with? Because I know your main thing is crested geckos, right?
Yeah.
So what other species are you breeding?
So so we breed all the New Caledonian geckos. I would say nowadays my main thing is crescent and gargoyle geckos. That's like what
Uh,
we're mostly known for. But we do giant geckos, chahua geckos. We do blue tongue skinks. We do a lot of blue tongue skinks, and we breed a lot of different like kind of like fringe species that are not as common or not as known. A lot of
mm,
different lacerdas. We breed a lot of we breed Cuban false chameleons, Chinese or Japanese cave geckos. So like we breed a lot of different things that that are not as common, but we enjoy working with. So that's why we work with them.
yeah, we have Eric from Eric's Morph Factory. He says he want to hear about the blue tongues. You know.
Nice, yeah, yeah.
So like,
The blue,
go ahead.
yeah. No, I was gonna say the blue tongues are another really interesting animal because there's so much room for improvement there, and there's so much the ice people like we were talking about before. There's people that have their own line of blue tongues, and you can look at an animal and say, oh, this comes from this person. There's like this guy, his name is Frank Payne, that has developed like these super dark animals that are very nice. So he has given his own touch to the blue tongue world with his breeding. There's also like our friend Ron Kudo. He was actually vending this reptile show. He has some awesome orange animals that are like sunrise line animals. So there's reds, there's yellows. Now there's the ivories, which are like a leucistic blue tongue. And there's a lot more morphs that are over in Australia that are not as common here. But as the years go by, they will eventually start to pick up. It's just there's such a small pool of those animals in the US, and because Australia is closed off and you can't import anything or export anything to Australia, it's going to take a little bit more time to start to establish those in the hobby.
Okay. You know, and this is a common, topic in the reptile hobbies, like about inbreeding and stuff like that. With such a, and it's almost similar to us hognose too, because there's not many people collecting hognose from the wild. There's a lot of states that it's actually illegal and they're protected species. Like,
Yeah.
how does that work with the geckos, chihuahuas, and like blue tongues? Um, do you eventually are bloodlines crossing over eventually?
Yeah. So we, as breeders, I think one of our jobs is to have as much diversity in our gene pool as possible. Now, you know, a lot of, like, for example, blue tongues, the sorry, my cat's in the back messing with
Yes, fine.
the light. With blue tongues, for example, it's a little bit harder because what's here in the United States is basically what's going to be like available, unless you import from Europe or something. But even then, it's like it's the gene pool isn't as big, so you got to work with what you got. And with the crested geckos and stuff, it's still like a small gene pool, relatively small. The good thing about reptiles is they're very resilient genetically. So that's why we have all these morphs, is because you know somebody will randomly hatch an albino, and then they breed the albino's offspring back to that albino, and they make more albinos, and then they start to outcross it, and eventually, there's 50,000 ball pythons in the United States, or even more, but so it's definitely important to have some sort of plan when it comes to breeding, and not just be like mindlessly breeding your geckos or any animal, because eventually you're going to run into a genetic bottleneck and you're going to start to see problems in your animals. So especially us, like, we are always adding new blood into our breeding pool. For example, with the gargoyle geckos in particular, like this past year, I collected about, I want to say about like 15 or 20 different animals from really nice bloodlines that are, not related at all to anything that I have, because I plan to, mix and breed everything back to my
Mhm.
stuff. So I think it's really important. Um, it's not that, it's not, breeding like an offspring back to its parent is sometimes necessary if you have like a world's first recessive mutation or something like that. But if you don't have that, if you have, you know, if you have the ability to produce that same look with just selective breeding, then by all means do that. There's no reason to keep breeding back into the same gene pool.
Okay. Yeah. So we have he's a hognose keeper from he's in Spain actually now. But he's asking if inbreeding crested is praised like in I guess like the midnight morph.
I wouldn't say it's praised. No, people do not. The only time the community kind of agrees on it is when it is something recessive. But if it's just for line breeding, or just to produce a particular look that is not recessive, it's frowned upon. People don't want that, and rightfully so. I agree with it. I don't think, the animals will most likely be fine, but
Mhm.
it's not necessary, especially nowadays with so many different, you know lines, and so many different lines of the same type of look that you may want. You could just cross those
Yeah,
lines and create a genetically stronger animal.
I agree. I agree, man. That's like one of my things this year was I'm importing an animal from Europe, and even though, like you said, there might be some kind of relation to the stuff that I have, stuff like that, but it's been in Europe for years, that bloodline. So, bringing in different bloodline that I have from the U.S. breeders and stuff. Um,
Yeah,
because I definitely want to, like you said, diversify the bloodlines and different different morphs and all that stuff.
yeah, yeah.
I
And
think
when you,
I think sometimes we get caught up in like, and don't get me wrong, like we all have our favorite breeders and our favorite people we want to get our what's it called, our reptiles from, and sometimes we get caught up with that and um just buying from one specific bloodline pool and then breeding those same animals back to back. Even I think even though if that breeder has multiple lines of that one more for bloodline, sometimes bringing stuff from other sources is a best practice.
yeah, 100%. Yeah. When I started, I bought geckos from as many different people as I could. And part of it was just because I liked everything else everybody else was producing. But looking back at it now, it's definitely a pillar to our breeding facility is like that genetic diversity that we have because we bought from so many different people.
Hmm. Yeah. I want to bring up because I know you are working on like a way of we want to like grade crested geckos and stuff like that. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh wait, what? Oh, to grade
Like,
Crested
yeah,
Geckos?
like to
Yeah, yeah.
grade and like all that stuff.
Yeah, so I recently launched a business or yeah, like a it's gonna be like a when you think about like the AKC, the American Kennel Club, where they
Hmm.
rate dogs based on their structure, their appearance, and all these type of things. That's what I basically I'm gonna do with crested geckos and other gecko species, but we're starting off with crested geckos because I think that's the most popular and what more people are getting excited about breeding. But the business is called Gold Standard Gecko Club, and we're gonna basically judge a gecko on based on a standard, like they do with dog shows and with rabbit shows and so on, and cat shows and all that. So there's going to be a standard that every gecko must follow, or every gecko must have to a certain extent to be able to be participate in the event. And there's going to be different categories, for each individual morph. So, for example, lily whites will be a category, axanthic will be a category, cappuccino category, tricolors, and but every animal in those particular categories are going to have to meet a standard. So, your animal can't have an underbite. Your animal can't have, a spinal deformity, for example. Obviously, and that's something that I'm really excited about because as we get bigger and as we get more people into this, we should be more like we should demand more from our breeders. We should put more responsibility on the breeders that are producing animals because we don't want sometimes I have, people message me all the time that are like, should I pair this to this or that to that or whatever? And it's like, this animal doesn't look like it's a healthy animal. It doesn't look like it's structurally sound. You know, the spine might be smaller than another animal than like what's supposed to be. So I want people to understand that there's a standard for the functionality of the animal and obviously for the morph or the category that you're breeding for. So I'm really excited about that. I think that's gonna just like it has with dogs and every other animal that has competitions like that. I think it's gonna take it to the next level, and it's gonna be a way to legitimize some breeders and to put breeders that maybe don't have the biggest following to put them right up there with those breeders that have a big following. Because if you're some no-name breeder and you produce a badass gecko and you win a competition, now people are going to know your name. Oh, this is a
Yeah.
a grand champion crested gecko tricolor or whatever. So they're
Hmm.
going to know, oh, this was produced by this person, and it's going to bring. I think it's going to kind of like level out the playing field in this crested gecko world. For example, there's a lot of like cliques and like people who only buy from each other over here. People only buy from each other over here. I want to kind of like shake that up. And one of the main concerns people had with this was that it was going to be kind of like like the big breeders just stroking themselves, like being just like basically it was going to be like just for the big breeders to
make
promote their own
even
geckos.
further promote their business. Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, that could be farther from the truth. What I was trying to do is bring a more level playing field for all the breeders, because I've been to reptile shows, man, that I'm walking around and I literally see an animal that is like, it just jaw dropping, and I've never even heard of this person before. So I want to be able to, give a platform for a person like that that's able to produce a gecko like that. So it's going to be completely merit based. If you have a badass animal, then you're going to win the competition. We're going to put a couple things in place to make sure that we decrease, or we can't ever eliminate bias, but we're going to try to decrease it as much as possible and try to be as fair as possible. I'm going to personally handpick the judges. So I'm really excited for it. I'm still developing it, because I want to make sure this thing is bulletproof before we have our first competition. But I'm shooting for next year, 2024, to have our first show, and it's gonna. I'll talk about that later, but it's gonna be a. I'm really excited about it. I
Yeah.
think it's gonna bring a lot of positivity to the community.
Well, and that's good to know, because like you said, when I first heard it, I thought it was a great idea, because it's a way to keep the standard of the reptiles high, and also be able to, like you said, give even the smallest breeder that maybe has a really badass collection, but doesn't have the quantity, doesn't have the following, a little bit of notoriety, and people will be able
Yeah.
to put their name out there. Um, what when did you think about this? Because I feel like this has probably been something you've been thinking for a while, and then you know maybe
Yeah.
finally put it out there, right?
Yeah, it's been something I've been thinking for a while. It actually started because so my whole life I've had all kinds of animals, but 3 years ago I got a dog for the first time, and I got an American Bully. So when I got the American Bully, I was like, I just, I love animals. I love not just reptiles. I love cats, dogs, everything. So when I got this dog, I started looking into the breeding of the dogs more. I started looking into, like, the structure of the dog, how to make a dog structurally sound, and make sure that the dog didn't have any issues down the line, that they were healthy and all this. And then obviously I stumbled upon the shows that they do, the TBKC for the American, or the ABKC for the American Bullies,
Mhm.
and AKC obviously for, like, the rest of the other breeds. But it really, it got my gears going, and I was like, yo, we should definitely do something like this for geckos, so we could have so we could kind of like legitimize ourselves even more, especially in the eyes of people who, you get like horse breeders or dog breeders, and they look at us reptile breeders like, oh, those are just some, like, basically
Like
like backyard breeders in the dog world, right? So I wanted to bring more, I wanted to be more legit. I wanted to bring more professionalism to our hobby. And I thought, I'm getting into dogs and I'm seeing the art of, like, how dog breeds are put together. And I'm like, yo, I like this. I like that people care about the functionality of this animal, of this dog. They want a dog that could live 15, 20 years and not have any issues. A dog with good, hips, knees, everything, etc. So that's what got me started, and that was about 3 years ago. And I had been thinking about it for about a year, um, and then I was like, I just started like game planning and trying to, like, and talking to other breeders, and seeing, and coming up with ideas. And now we have a pretty solid foundation of what we're gonna do. I'm just ironing out the details and then doing, all the extra stuff. I got to get the table covers, the business, the flyers, all that stuff.
yeah,
Uh, but that's where it originated from.
yeah. I think you starting this, and then once it really you hit the ground running, you do a couple, and people see that it's actually working, it's gonna spread to other species in our community. I definitely think it's gonna happen.
I hope so. My plan was to do it with the crested with gecko species in general, the more popular ones, of course, in the beginning. So I wanted to do crested geckos, gargoyle geckos, leopard geckos, African fat tail geckos, and go on and so on and so on. And eventually, I don't know if I've ever said this, but I want to get to bearded dragons and some of the other animals that are very common in the hobby. Bearded dragons being like one of my first ones that's not gecko related, because just looking at bearded dragons, if you pay attention, there's a lot of bearded dragons out there, obviously, but some have like a really short nose, some have like a really long nose or a snout. Some are just like overweight, so I want to bring that to the bearded dragon world. And I think maybe somebody listens to this and they're like, oh, I'm going to do that. So
Yeah, yeah.
whatever, but eventually I'm going to get to it.
And then that's interesting because it's like I think I was in one of these Hognose groups chats, and somebody mentioned like, hey, you know how like you go to a vet, to like a like a general vet, and they have a poster of the dog, like what's healthy weight, what's malnutrition, what's obese, right? Like, how come we don't have that for reptiles, right?
Yeah.
Because you do see a lot of you know overweight reptiles and stuff like that. And I think it's just because, not because people maybe do it on purpose, just there's no guidelines
Yes, and
sometimes.
the thing is, reptiles are very, very different than a mammal, because a mammal is warm-blooded. So a
Hmm.
mammal's gonna burn that food off a lot quicker because it needs to create energy to keep itself warm.
Yeah.
Reptiles, they're cold-blooded, their metabolism is a lot slower. So when people pound it with food, their body naturally stores that as fat. Where in the wild, an animal that is eating maybe 3 times a week is getting fed every single day now. And because they're opportunistic feeders, most of them, they're going to take the opportunity every single time and they're going to eat every single time. And then you get an animal that's overweight and people think it's cute, or people think there's like, especially with like some gecko species and certain animals in general, bearded dragons too, like people see a fat bearded dragon and they think it's healthy, it's good. No, a lot of
Mhm.
times that fat bearded dragon is like the opposite end of healthy, and
Mhm.
the bearded dragon that actually looks skinny to you is the most healthy one. If you go to the wild, these animals aren't obese like they are in captivity. A lot of these animals are what a lot of people in today's standard would call, malnourished. And some of them, obviously you're not going to starve your animal if you have it in captivity, but you got to take a little bit from what you see in the wild and put it
Mhm.
and try to use it for what you do and try to replicate like how we do. We're replicating basically what the wild is doing so these
Yeah.
animals thrive. And I think that gets lost a lot of times,
Yeah.
especially
And
in
then
the
that,
pet trade.
for sure. And then like talking about the wild, right? Like all of our animals in captivity, they don't have to hunt.
Yeah.
So it's that's a big difference, where like maybe the animals that in the wild might be eating a consistent food source, but they're hunting for it. A lot of
Yeah.
our animals are just sitting there waiting for us to put it on their plate and know exactly where to go look for their food, right? Like a
Yeah,
couple of steps and
exactly.
their food's right there. So
Yeah.
I think people we need to take that in consideration as well, where like that we've taken that aspect out of their daily lives and their metabolism. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
like us
It's
humans. Yeah.
yeah, 100%. I think it's a good point, because, especially like as as I've gone as I've kind of like had more experience in the reptile world and just with animals in general, I've noticed that a lot of these animals, we don't give them as much credit as they deserve in terms of how intelligent they are. You know, like going back to what I was saying earlier, that there is a necessary the people who breed in bulk and have animals in racks and all this, it's necessary for the hobby. It's necessary because you won't be able to breed those high numbers unless you have something like that. But the
Mhm.
more I go, the more I like. I learn about these animals, I'm like, the more I want to give them, the more I want to not necessarily like make it like a vivarium, but like the more I want to make it more interesting for their lives because they are smarter than what we think they are. You know, I forgot who was telling me this, but I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he was telling me how box turtles, there's like, I think it was the eastern box turtle that there's like an area of like, I want to say like 10 acres. And this box turtle will go to, you could grab it and put it, 5 acres away, and it would just find its way back to its same basically home or burrow
Bro.
or whatever. And it was mind blowing to me. Like they were experimenting. They were grabbing this box turtle. They were putting it over there. 5 acres away. It would go back to its place. They would grab it, put it over there. It would go back to its place, and it would find its way back to its place. And the other day, actually, we were talking. My wife and I were talking because there's a guy here in our neighborhood who has a gopher tortoise that lives basically like under his house, and he would, you know, he's not supposed to do this, but he would take the gopher tortoise and put it somewhere else, and it would just always end up under his house. And it's like these animals are so smart, man, and they're smarter than what we think. And I think they deserve more than what we give them oftentimes. Now, there's a caveat to that. Us as reptile breeders may not be able to provide all that. We got to make sure our animals are healthy and try to
Mhm.
give them as much as possible, but at the same time we have to be profitable for this all to make sense.
Mhm.
But if you're just a hobbyist or if you're just a pet keeper, give your animal the bigger enclosure, give it
Yeah.
as much as you can. And there's ways, sometimes bigger is not better if you're not doing it right. Because, for example, like people will keep a baby lychee in a big enclosure. A lychee is a giant gecko. So they'll keep it in a big enclosure, and then the gecko doesn't do good. But it doesn't do good not because it's in a huge enclosure, it's because the enclosure is not set up properly. And
Mhm.
there's a train of thought that which in the simplest form is right. You keep a gecko like that in a tiny tub because it's going to do better. It's going to eat better. It's going to do better. And that's true. But when you break it down into why that is, it's because the people who put them in big enclosures don't often understand how the animal thinks and how the animal works, and they're not setting up the enclosure properly. If you have a tiny gecko in a big open space, it's going to stress out. It's not going to eat. You have it in a small space, it's going to feel more secure and it's going to eat more. But you could have that big ass space and make it, suitable for that animal. So
Yeah.
I always say, like, if you're a pet keeper or just a hobbyist, try to do as much as you can for those animals because I think it's the best. I think they're smarter than what we give them credit for. A lot of them, at least. Maybe not the
Yeah.
Crested Geckos,
But
but
it's funny because a lot of people say that about the species they have and they breed like about hognose. We're like, oh man, these things are derpy. Like they have nothing in between. But man, sometimes you'll grab them or you open up a tub and they come up and sit and watch. Like
yeah,
they'll lay their head on the edge of the tub and watch what's going on. So it's like there's something going on in there. Like they're
yeah,
understanding
yeah,
what's the movement and stuff. But
yeah,
similar situation for hognose, especially a 2-month-old hognose. It's 10-15 grams. You put it in a 10 gallon or 20 gallon enclosure, and it's pretty big. And same situation, like either you can start it off like in the 6 quart for a very temporary enclosure and stuff like that if you're a pet keeper, or if you do decide to go with the bigger enclosures, like put a lot of cluster of foliage or hides and stuff like that, because it's gonna get stressed, it's gonna have eating issues, and you'll never see it. It's always be hiding.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it comes down to understanding the animal. And I know that's easier said than done, especially when you're just getting started. But
Mhm.
but you know, the more that I'm in this, the more I understand that we don't know as much as we think we know. And, you know, we see that with like when somebody keeps, for example, there's, I don't know if you're familiar with who Ron St. Pierre is, but Ron St. Pierre is a man that is a pioneer in this hobby. But he is like he's an old school guy, but he is like innovative in the reptile hobby, and he's doing things that I look at what he's doing and I'm like, oh my God, like his system is like effective and it's made for a breeder, but it's also like the best possible way you could keep the animal. So it's insane. So anyways, he's been keeping crested geckos outside. And for the longest time, we would say you can't keep a crested gecko, especially in Florida. You can't keep a gecko outside. It's going to die. It's too hot, But there's way of doing it. And they might even do better outside if you do it properly. Now, of course, I wouldn't suggest a novice to do that, but my whole point in bringing this up is that for 15 years, I thought I was sure in my head, no, you cannot keep a crested gecko outside. And then this guy comes and he schools me and says, no, I actually have 100 geckos outside. What are you like? And they're doing great. So I'm, funny enough, I'm going to be going up to his place soon and talking to him and picking his brain about it more. But it's just to show you that sometimes we think we know things, and just because it works a certain way doesn't mean it's not going to work a different way.
100%. Yeah. I think we've just are scratching the top of what we know about reptiles, because there's not many studies, there's not many field studies, or even like in captivity studies done for reptiles. Everything is now, especially with social media, a lot more people are sharing, and the information's easy accessible, and it's you can see proper ways of care, and then you can also see the total opposite, and try to gauge. What I always tell people is like, get multiple informations and then gauge what best works for you and the animal.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's not one way to do it. There's multiple ways, and then like you said, that like St. Pierre, there might be that even a novice that might come up with this great idea just because they're brand new and they don't have they're not stuck in that box that the community has set. And they're just thinking about, okay, I'm going to do it just this because this will make sense, or this will be best for the animal. And it might work out for the best.
Exactly. That's a good point. And the thing about the community nowadays is that you something like that and you get flamed for it. If you don't, especially if you're a novice, and I don't know about the hognose world, but in the crested gecko world, if I, as a first-time keeper, were to post, oh, I'm keeping my crested gecko outside in Florida and it's 90 degrees, people would lose their shit. And they would be like, you're crazy, you're going to kill your gecko. And they would just try to kill you basically. But, then you get a guy like Ron St. Pierre and just define what people thought was supposed to be the right way to do it.
Yeah, that's very true. I think it's across all boards of like, like, you're a noob, right? Like, you don't know anything. Like, it's part of it.
But sometimes, like you said, we're in this box and we think everything that there is to know is in this box. But somebody that's not in the box, because they haven't been programmed by the community, is looking at it from a different perspective and saying, wait, why would I do this where I could do this? And it makes more logical sense to do it for them that way. And it works out better for them. So.
And I think, and that with your Golden Standard Geckos Club, I think that might be another avenue of like that, maybe not novice, but recent breeder coming up with really good, high quality animals, and, might say, okay, I keep it like this and this and that. Well, he's producing really high quality animals. It's got to work, right?
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, in the process of me developing this, I've looked at some of my groups and I'm like, wait, why are these two paired together? Like, as far as like they're healthy and everything, but as far as structure goes, this should not be paired up with this. So it's even kind of like taking me back out of that box me myself, and I, and I have these, and I set up all these breeding groups, and I'm like, wait, hold up, this shouldn't be this way. I'm not doing this right. And that was the whole point of it. I think that's the whole point of it. I really, it was really, I was really like distraught when I saw that a lot of people, there's some backlash to it because people thought it was going to be like basically for the big breeders to kind of like to separate themselves even more from the rest. And I'm like, no, that couldn't be farther from the truth of what I'm trying to do. I think a good breeder, you give a good breeder two geckos that are maybe not as good looking as some of the other people of what the other people have, and he could produce some really cool animals, some really fire stuff. So I think that is the whole point of it. And I think that's gonna, like you said, it's gonna take a lot of people out of that box and see things, through a different lens.
I agree, man. And let's say, I told you backstage. I want to talk about because we both live in Florida. You've been doing reptile a lot longer than I have, especially here in Florida. And we have certain obstacles we got to deal with certain times, right? And you've actually lived through it and dealing with like reptile bans and all that stuff. How have you gotten through that and then still keep pushing and building your brand and then taking care of your animals?
Yeah, so it's tough because some of the animals that I love, that I had literally as a kid, I would dream of owning, like albino green iguanas and all these things. As a little kid, that was one of my biggest dreams, to have albino green iguana. Actually, before the bearded dragon that I got, what I originally wanted was an iguana. But my uncle, who was in the hobby already, he was like, actually, that's not the best pet. I'm going to send you a bearded dragon. But anyways, it sucks because I feel like those animals were taken from me, because technically I could have been grandfathered in, but they pass these laws in a way that it kind of like forces you to get out of these animals unless you want to spend crazy amount of money for them. And what I mean by that is that with the iguanas and the tegus, we would be able to be grandfathered in, but for me to keep them outside, I would have to build literally like a cage that's with the supplies and the work. It would be worth like $10,000, the enclosure, because it has to be cement floors, cement walls, 8 inches of cement floor and walls. It has to be double door. It has to be a certain gauge of wiring and all this. And I just couldn't afford to do that with all my animals, especially if they were just going to be pets and I wasn't going to be able to breed them, and I just couldn't afford that. So I had to get rid of my animals, because if I were to there's no room to keep them inside. They're way too big. They require too much space, and it just wouldn't make sense. So I had to get rid of all those animals. So it's hard because, I love Florida for all that it is, and I love being able to keep other animals outside, and I just love Florida as a state as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, there's this constant battle of like trying to fight for our rights to be able to have these animals and all this that we constantly have to battle. And the way that you kind of like deal with it is by fighting. There's no other way. You have to fight for it, because if you just, roll up into a ball and let them step on you, they're going to do exactly that. They're going to take everything that they can. And that's why I always encourage. That's why I'm a very big advocate for USARK Florida, and for just pushing against what the FWC is trying to do. And I get that there's an issue with the invasive pythons in the Everglades and all that, but why did they have to ban some of these other animals that are not even invasive yet? Like that's what doesn't make sense to me. And when they put all these heavy and strict regulations in place, the people who are doing the right stuff are the ones who are going to get punished. Because if I was like, let's say if I was like unethical, I don't even consider that unethical. I just think that's a stupid law. But if I was going to be a lawbreaker and just breed those animals anyway, and I'm probably doing some other illegal stuff, I would do it anyways, no matter the law. you know. So I'm the one who I want to follow the laws because I don't want to have any issues and I don't want to lose my livelihood. So the person like me that actually has their enclosures in place where these animals never gotten away outside and I've never had any issues with that. I'm the one who has to get rid of my animals, where some of these people that aren't going to follow the laws anyways, that may be doing something wrong, are keeping their animals anyways, and they're not helping the problem. So I think, you know, the best thing you could do if you're in Florida and you're a reptile breeder is support USARK Florida. And there has been some people that, you know, rightfully so, they have, you know, their right to doubt what USARK Florida is doing. But when you really look at the only line of defense that we have against this is USARK Florida. And whether people believe it or not, that's their issue. If they look into what USARK Florida has done, into the amount of money that they have spent to fight these, you know, these lawsuits and all this, it's unbelievable. And I personally know all these people, so I could say with conviction because I know who these people are. I talk to them, I see them face to face, and they tell me their struggles. A lot of these people, the biggest donors of USARK Florida are these people themselves that are in the organization, and they're not making a dime from it. Like, they're not making a single dime from it. They're giving everything they have, you know, all their precious time to put into this thing. And then there's other people that, you know, just disregard all their hard work because they don't know, honestly. But I think that's like the first line of defense that we have, and that's why we got to back them.
Yeah, and I think like you said, you know, you can play. No organization is perfect, first of all, right?
Of
Like,
course.
there's definitely flaws and stuff like that, and we can play the game. Oh, they can be doing this better, or maybe they should do it this way. But can you imagine if they weren't there?
Exactly.
You know, that's the thing. Like, if they weren't there, if USARK Florida did not exist, um,
There'd be
I
no
mean,
resistance. There'd be
yep.
no resistance whatsoever. And who
Hmm.
knows where we would be right now.
Hmm.
And that's the thing, like, that's a lot of people's main issue is that, you know, they're not doing this right, they're not doing that right, they're not, you know, wait, hold the fuck up. If you think, sorry if I have, you don't want me to curse, but if you don't think that they're doing this right or whatever, then why don't you do it? It's easy to talk when you're sitting down with your, you know, with your snakes in your house and you're not doing crap about it. You're just staying there and you just, you know, like, okay, well, if if you're not willing to do anything about it, then maybe you shouldn't speak on it. If
Hmm.
you're not, if I'm just complaining about something, I'm not putting up a better solution about it. I'm not giving a different, you know, a different point of view or a different strategy, then why are you complaining about it?
I
You
agree.
know?
I agree. Yeah, man, that's one thing. I'm probably military and stuff like that. And that's one thing like always got instilled in us is like there's always a solution. Like, you know, one thing was if we went through a training area, you always leave it as better than what you found it, right? Like, be the person to make the change if you don't like what's going on. And you know, and the people in this world that are, you know, notable either, you know, all over the world, not just in the reptile community, but like those are the people that put in the time and actually made changes because they didn't like a certain system.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you know, if you like you said, it's easy to say I don't like this and I don't like that. Okay, then what is the solution? At least give an idea how it can be better, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then, you know, what have you ever thought about like worst case scenario, like, you know, if you know legislation came down upon like more legislation came down upon like species that you currently keep and you're working with, have you ever thought about like what would be your move then?
Yeah, I've thought about it. Honestly, my what I would do would be close down the business. Tiki's Geckos, I would close it down. I would just keep my private animals and, you know, release all my licenses. That way you know, they wouldn't bother me. Just keep my personal animals, my private animals, and just start another business that has nothing to do with animals. And it sucks. I want to do this for the rest of my life, but it's just so stressful, man. Like I don't want
It
to.
is. Yeah, and I think
If you move the whole country, you know, the whole country to an extent has their thing. They're going their battle against this hobby, one way or another. You know, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, all these states are also banning animals. New York, California, whatever. Doesn't matter where you go. Eventually, it's going to catch up to you, in my opinion. You know, some states might take longer than others, but if that's the way, if that's what we're doomed for, is that if that's where we're headed, eventually it's going to catch up to you. So I wouldn't, you know, a lot of people have packed up and left and gone to a different state. I have thought about it. I'm like, you know, I would love to go to Texas or something, but but when I really, really sit down and think about it, I just want to be able to have the animals I have, and I know that I would get grandfathered in for mostly everything that I got, so I would stick with that, and I would just start another business, and I wouldn't, you know, have my license with FWC or anything, so they don't have a right to come and inspect my facility or my animals.
yeah, yeah, because a lot of people don't know that. Like even with a Class 3 permit here in Florida, you basically when you apply for that license for that permit, you agree that FWC can come and inspect your area wherever you're keeping your animals.
Yep, at
And a lot
any
of people
time.
at any time. Yeah, it doesn't have to be like like a venomous permit and stuff like that. It's just a simple Class
Nope.
3 that allows you basically to display and sell to the public. You're
Yeah.
allowing FWC to come. You're agreeing that FWC can come into your facility or your home, wherever you keep these animals, to inspect at any time. So
Yep.
yeah, a lot of people don't know that a lot of us breeders in Florida that are doing this, are opening our doors to it because it's something we want to do, and that's the only way the proper way to do it, right?
Exactly.
Certainly. So and that's very interesting, because man, there's so many other things in this world and stuff like that maybe there should be regulations against and stuff like that, and there isn't. And animals that are harmless really to people, and most of the time harmless to the environment, are getting the brunt of it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's the thing about the government. Like you give it what the government wants to regulate, the government wants to
Mhm.
tax you, the government wants to do this, that, and the other, and that's how that machine runs. So it's just a thing with anything, in any aspect of your life that you're gonna have to deal with. But even the animals that are harmful for to the environment, I think there should be a of people who want to keep those animals, like a Burmese python, for example. Like I personally, by the time I was able to keep a Burmese pythons were banned. Like I wouldn't have kept the Burmese python in the other facilities that I was in, or in my parents' garage where I started. But like now, today, if I could, I would keep a Burmese python because I could give it a big ass cage outside, and I can make sure is not going to be able to escape. I
Mhm.
think I should be able to keep an animal like that, and I have to apply for any permit they require me to, and maybe if I wanted to, even if they say, okay, you can have it, but you have to build this $10,000 cage to make sure it's hurricane proof, that is no way is escaping. No problem. At least let me have that option, because that's an animal that I want one, that I wish I could have one day. And maybe I will never own that animal because I maybe never will live outside the state of Florida. But that's an animal I wish I had the ability to interact with on a personal level, and now I will never have that. So that's my issue with it, is that even those animals that are known to be invasive and known to have an issue with the ecosystem here in Florida, listen, that's not my problem. Like I did that didn't happen because of me. That has nothing to do with me. That doesn't have to do that has nothing to do with the majority of people who are in the reptile world.
Correct.
With 99.99% of the people in the reptile world, that has nothing to do with. So why does the 99.99% of the people that are in the reptile world being punished for something that they had never had any influence on? I
Mm-hmm.
think if you regulate it and make it stricter, so the people who are so it naturally weeds out the people who aren't going to do a good job, and the people who are serious about it have to take those extra steps, have to spend that extra money. Those people should be allowed to keep them, in my opinion. Now, obviously, that's not how things work, but maybe I'll
Yeah.
run for governor one day and change everything.
Tiki for governor, man. That'd be great. You know, it's funny because I had contacted last week. Illinois, you need to have a permit to own a hognose. There's a native says
Yeah,
that. So I emailed their office that deals with it, and I was very surprised. I think I emailed them like at 11 o'clock. At 4 o'clock, I had one of their officers calling me. It's like, hey, thanks for the email, and this is the process if you're selling here or if you're going to come and vend. This is the process. Gave me the full rundown. He goes, we try to make it a, feasible for people to do it, to own and come vend. As long as people follow the rules. And that's one thing I tell people too is and the guy sent me the permit for like local people there, residents and vendors, and it takes 10 minutes to fill it out. But he was telling me, like almost every year they make so many citations and arrests just because people don't want to fill out the 10-minute application. And he says 99.9 does the times I get applications, they get approved.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. It's like that. It's like Illinois, for example. Fine, you don't. You wanna kind of like put barriers in place so there's less issues and less you know people doing sketchy stuff with
Mhm.
the snakes that are naturally found over there. Fine, put these permits, put these barriers in place for people to stay within that, but at least give us an option.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I was very happy to talk to the guy, and he was very friendly. And this is a guy that actually starts and reviews the applications and stuff like that, and he gave me good information. So I was glad that I was very surprised I got a call, even the a couple hours away.
Yeah,
Here it probably would have been 2 months
yeah,
after that email. Um,
yeah. It's funny, like the FWC here, just it's so backed up. It's such an
yeah,
outdated system that they got going on,
mhm,
but
yeah.
it's what we got to
That,
deal with.
that's yeah, and I think maybe that's another point of view. Like we're here talking about that. Like, damn, how can man like can that be fixed from the inside? Do we work with them and stuff like that? Those are ideas I think that USARK Florida does throw around and is working on actually. We're working with the organization to not just
Yeah,
fight against them, but to work with them.
yeah,
You know?
100%. Yeah, yeah.
And I think go ahead.
Like they were trying to do with the Diamondback Terrapin breeding program.
Mhm,
USARK Florida and FWC both agree that these should be protected species, and that there is a concern with the decreasing population in the wild, but there is a difference in opinion of what we should do about it. USARK Florida was suggesting a breeding program where people could actually have a license to breed these animals, and maybe help the populations in the wild. But FWC thinks no, nobody should be able to work with these animals. Nobody should be able to you know breed them or sell them or anything, because that's just going to promote the poaching of these animals, which I disagree. But one of the important things about this whole thing is USR Florida is trying to work with FWC. It's not just heads on clash one versus one. It's also
mhm,
like trying to be cooperative and trying to make it work, because there has to be some compromise. Even in anything, we agree there's certain issues with invasive species in Florida, but we also agree that you know we should have a right to have our own businesses, to make a living, for the pursuit of happiness, and so on.
mhm.
So
For sure, man. Yeah, yeah. And I think this is going to be a long journey for us to be able to, and it's going to be ongoing battles and stuff, and we can't just put our hands up and say, "Oh, it's nothing we're doing is working." I
Yeah.
think that's where we can end like this topic, because just keep supporting US Arc. Down here I have the US Arc Florida and US Arc logos. I always put their links on all my videos and everything I share, because, like I said, I think they're doing, maybe not doing the perfect job, but they're doing something for us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And
and
if you think they could do something better, then maybe approach them and
mhm.
join forces with them and suggest the idea or be a part of the team and help do something about it. Because at the end of the day, we're all people who love our animals, that want to keep our animals and want to be able to just live freely and not have to think about one day the government coming and taking our pets.
Yep, yeah, for sure, man. And so like I said, yeah, I want to go back to conversation of like family and you having your family working with you. At the shows, I've always seen you. Is your brother, right? Was he at the show this weekend with you?
Yeah, so he's my brother from another mother.
Okay, gotcha. And
So
then I always
Manny
see
is.
your wife too with you. A lot of the shows she's there helping you out too. Um,
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's when I see that, and that's another reason I wanted to have you on the show, because my whole thing is, like I said, it's my family. With everybody in our families involved. My wife was in vended with us this weekend too, the girls. So I really enjoyed that. That you have a family, community with Tiki Geckos. Um,
Yeah.
with when you met your wife, um, was she into reptiles, or did she get involved in reptiles after meeting you?
So she wasn't into reptiles like she is today. She was
Hmm.
always around animals, and she has a really awesome story actually. So she ever since she was very young, she has always loved animals. And I literally said this to her the other day. I'm like, baby, you love animals. Like I'm more fast. I thought I loved animals. I'm like, I'm just fascinated by them because
Yeah,
she will literally she goes out of her way to save any animal she can, and that's not something I ever did, you know.
yeah.
So but when she was younger, she would volunteer, in different facilities, and she would work at different facilities that she would be hands on with the animals. And one of her biggest idols when she was growing up was Steve Irwin, right? So when she was in high school, there was a competition that the Australia Zoo put out that was basically like, show us in a video why you love wildlife, and we'll fly you out to the Australia Zoo for an internship. So my wife won this fucking contest. Like she won this contest. She did a whole video with opossums. There's an opossum right behind the camera right now because anyways. So she loves opossums because they're so misunderstood, and she would always rehabilitate them, and she would get them if they were hit by a car or something, bring them back up, and then re-release them in the wild. So she did this whole video and stuff. Anyways, she ended up winning the contest, and the Australia Zoo flew her out to Australia, and she interned in Australia, worked with their elephants, with all their animals, and that really like just fueled her passion even more. And she would go back every summer to Australia to work over there. And she has always been around animals. So
Gotcha.
she's worked with gators. Like I haven't even worked with gators to the extent that she has, but she's worked with a lot of different animals. But when she finally met me, you know, she was kind of like introduced into the reptile hobby, into this business, and she took to it really quick because of her passion for animals, and
Hmm.
that's how it's been. So
Yeah,
she's been the perfect. She compliments me very well, and she's been the perfect addition to our team.
that's really cool, man. And that's really interesting, because like my wife is similar too. My wife, there's a funny story. My wife runs over one of our neighbors' mailbox because she saw a dog on their yard that was like a stray dog, and she's like looking and hits the mailbox because she's like, I'm gonna pull over to get it, right? I
Yeah,
think it's like that women, like mother instinct to save a lot of living things.
yeah,
My wife too. My wife was never really into reptiles. Like she had the normal, common, domestic, mammal animals growing up and stuff like that. But she does love animals, and um, she last year was it Daytona? She came home with a bearded dragon.
Oh
You
man.
know, so it's funny because like I see her love for like exotic animals and stuff like that starting to grow little
Right.
by little. So it's very interesting because this weekend she's definitely afraid of like bugs and stuff like that. But she went and held a one of the jumping spiders, and she almost took one home. So
Yeah.
it's pretty cool how like the reptile community can be like a gateway to a whole bunch of other different type of species and exotic animals, and you never know what animal you like until you start really within this world, right?
Yeah. And it opens your mind up to different species, like you said, like your wife probably never thought she would enjoy a jumping spider or a
Hmm.
hognose snake, but there she is. Like
Hmm.
it's great because I think it also, like, we have a lot of us have a fascination with animals and with like nature, and being able to work with them just gets us that much closer to nature and the world that we live in. Just, I've learned so much about different places in the world just because of the animals. Like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I got these crested geckos. They come from New Caledonia. Where's New Caledonia? What exactly is the weather like over there? And then, down the line, I end up finding out about their culture and everything else. And it's like, now I want to go to New Caledonia. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting how that all kind of like ties together.
Mhm. Have you been over there yet, or do you have plans on like taking a trip out there?
Brother, I haven't been there yet. I have plans to go there one day for sure.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it like if I'm lucky next year, I'm gonna try to make that happen because that's a trip that I definitely gotta make, and it's gonna be a dope YouTube video.
Yeah, I can
but
imagine, man. I had
yeah.
this guy. He relocates snakes in California. Um, his IG thinks Wrangler Bruce.
Hmm.
Um, and he was telling me the in the podcast. He said like his family takes yearly trips, like these major yearly trips, and the way they decide on the trip is what nature and what wildlife they want to see, and then they base their trip off of that. I go, man,
Yeah.
that's so cool to think about. To base your trip off of that. A lot of times, we base our trips off. Okay, we're gonna go see a family, or we're gonna go see this building and stuff like that, or like
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
monument. Where
Yeah.
like no, I want to go see elephants. So I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna go to Africa. I'm gonna go to Asia. So I
Yeah.
think
So,
that's really cool to do.
dude, that's dope. That's something I want to do. It's I have a friend that he's here in South Florida, and he is part of the reptile hobby. He has a bunch of different geckos and reptiles and iguanas and all that. And he just got up and left to South Africa for 1 year, and he traveled South Africa. He went to Madagascar and all these places. But it's him, his wife, and I think two kids, 2 or 3 kids. But so, dude, I'm looking at this man. I'm like living his life through his Instagram and stuff because he is like, it's somebody that I've known through the hobby and stuff, and he keeps like
Mhm.
day geckos and all these cool things. And then he goes out to the wild and he's catching, panther chameleons, satanic leaf-tailed geckos, like cobras. Like he's seeing all these cool animals in the wild, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh my god, I'm like, dude, I envy you so much right now because you just like he just got up and took his family and they did like basically a year of traveling and herping and just being out there in nature and finding these animals. And that's something that I hope to be able to do one day. But that's like
Yeah.
one of the coolest parts about what we do, like learning about all this stuff for sure.
Yeah. Opening that door to all these different things. And one of the biggest
Experiences,
thing,
yeah.
yeah, experiences. And another thing too is like I like. It's funny because you start talking to a reptile person about reptiles, or like, you get a person that likes reptiles talking about reptiles. You won't shut them up. You know.
Yeah.
When somebody asks me, is like, especially I had said this earlier. couple of months ago. It's like when I decided to move away from like the corporate world and stuff like that. We were at a friend's party and stuff like that. And what's a common question people ask you? Oh, what do you do for work? You know, and one of the first things was like, oh, I breed reptiles. You know, that was like the first time saying that, right? Like, so I was like, oh, that's
Yeah.
pretty cool to think about that. You know, um,
Yeah.
that the next day I really thought about that. I was like, all right, I'm really breeding reptiles. You know, and the expressions you get when you say that is pretty interesting to see people's faces.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
You know,
it's so true. Like, especially like when you first meet, somebody that doesn't have a clue that this is even a thing that people keep reptiles as pets. There's people like that out there. Um, and when they hear that, they're like, wait, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, who? What do you mean you breed reptiles?
yeah, yep,
That's really
yeah,
interesting.
yeah, it is, man. Um, you know, we're getting close to the 2 hour mark. And I wanted to ask you a couple more questions, like especially the breeding portions of crested geckos and stuff like that. If you had to start today your collection and you had to get a pair, you had to get that pair, what would it be today?
Today,
Yep.
it would be a lily white and a cappuccino because I think one of the coolest animals that can be made right now, which is a frappuccino, which is a combination of both. And the lily white and the cappuccino at this point, they're not super expensive. They're pretty easy to get into. You could pay, for a total of $600, you could get two really nice animals and produce some outstanding looking animals. So that's what I would do. And you'll get, you breed a lily white and a cappuccino, you're going to get a mix of frappuccinos, you're going to get a mix of lily whites, of cappuccinos, and normals. So you'll have a lot of different stuff to play with and to experiment with.
That's a good point. I like that. That's a very good tip for anybody out there that's looking into, you know, dipping their toes into breeding or maybe getting that pair to see if they even like it. Um,
Yeah.
and then, is there something that you do with the breeding process that you think maybe sets you apart from other breeders, or you know that has definitely like made you successful in the breeding process?
Yes, I think that, like we were saying before, having a sort of a vision of the animal that you want to produce and slowly working to get to that point is
Hmm.
super important. I think a lot of people need to. I'm going to steal this from a friend of mine that said this, and I never forgot it. Is breeding with intent. You know, breeding with intent in the way of, like, you see two animals and you see how they could complement each other to make an animal that will get you closer to the goal that you want. So that's definitely a big thing. Obviously, it helps that, the experience that I've had along the way from just being and learning how the genetics and how the morphs kind of like work with each other is important. But that's something that it's experience. It's going to take time to understand it. Some people, it's intimidating when you get into especially the world of crested geckos or hognose, and there's so many different morphs out there. It's intimidating to be like, wow, I got to learn all this, and like it's so scary to think like, damn, I'm so far behind all these other people. But
Hmm.
it's, if you're into it, you're gonna it's gonna come to you naturally, because you're gonna have that you're gonna crave to learn that.
Yeah, and I think you know, like that point of view of like, oh, I'm so behind these other people. I think you know you should compare yourself to yourself. Like following that. Oh, I need to get to where this person's at. Is good. It's always going to be a race, and it's one of those things like you know it's hard to catch up. You know that
Yeah,
person that was
it's
breeding for 5, 10 years. It's almost impossible to catch up to someone unless you're coming in with a load of cash and you could drop in so much and get like the high end projects and just start off from there,
and
right?
and even then, sometimes those people aren't the most successful because those people are expecting to get a return on their investment right away, and it doesn't
Mhm.
always work like that.
Yeah.
Animals will decide not to breed one year, animals will die, animals will get sick, everything can go wrong when you're working with animals. So it is interesting because a lot of the times those people that think, I'm so far behind and I'm starting off with something that's not as to the quality that I want to get to, sometimes those people, believe it or not, are going to be the people that get the farthest, because it's almost like a catch 22. Like you have to work with for what you want, so you value it more versus the person that just dumps a bunch of money in, has all these animals, and then doesn't see results real quick, and then decide, all right, no, I don't want to do this no more.
Yeah, I agree. And what are your thoughts on like joint breedings, or finding like a mentor in the hobby, especially if you're gonna breed these animals.
I think that, so two things. I'll start
Hmm.
with the mentor thing first. The mentor thing, super important, especially if you could find the right person, right? So, for example, you with Estlin,
Hmm.
there's no other person that I would recommend more than Estlin, honestly.
Hmm.
Uh, I've had Esme has been a mentor of mine for a little bit as well, and I've gotten mentorship from a lot of different people that I looked up to in the hobby, and it's super important because it just cuts back so much time, so much trial and error could be eliminated if they just give you their experience. So they could tell you, listen, just do this and this is going to work for you, and that that could save you so much time. Or if you don't know why something's going wrong, a more experienced breeder could tell you, this is what you're doing wrong, you're pairing at the wrong time of the year, or this female is too small, whatever the case may be. So mentorship is super important. If you could find it, if you have somebody that you trust that is willing to do that for you, because not everybody's willing to do that for you.
Hmm.
Some people think that they're, God's gift to earth, and that they should be given every piece of advice that is out there. But some
Yeah.
people don't deserve that, quite frankly. So you have to earn that. You have to earn that spot with the person that you want to be mentored from. You can't just demand it. You have to show that you're willing to, you know, it's an exchange. You have to give some value for those people to give value back to you. And I think a lot of people miss that nowadays. I get so many people that I don't mind helping. I help out. I answer every single question on my Instagram and Facebook and all this stuff. But a lot of people come off very arrogant and very rude, and think like, oh, can you identify the most? And they send me 20 pictures of 20 geckos. I'm like, yo, I don't know you, guy. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
relax.
Yeah.
But
You
and with
should
the
still,
second thing,
like, before we can move on to the second thing, I was gonna say, like, the experiences and giving like knowledge to the non-experienced people, I think just helps the whole community of the reptiles, because if people are producing or being able to produce better quality, healthier animals from the beginning, then it just elevates everybody else's animals too,
agreed,
and that's my
agreed,
point
and
of
that
view.
100%. And that's why we do so much so much educational videos, and that's why I'm, to an extent, willing to talk to everybody and willing to help everybody, because of that same thing. If I help this guy, you know, it's just gonna help the whole hobby in general. Aside from the fact that, that person might feel some type of gratitude and might become a customer of yours for that. So that's an aspect of it in itself, of course. But there is definitely, what you said, like, that's just, it's just gonna bring everybody up. It's gonna raise the quality and the quality of the life of these animals, if when it comes to breeding or captivity
Mhm.
or whatever. And it's just going to raise the the level of the hobby. But yeah, you're completely right.
Yeah. So, and we'll move on. And what are your thoughts on like joint breeding and stuff like that?
Okay, so joint breedings and collaborations, I only suggest you do that with somebody you know very well and you trust very well. And sometimes it's, if you're a newer breeder, it could be good or bad. It could be good in the sense that you could be kind of like breeding up, like you could be breeding to a nicer animal that you can't afford maybe, and you're going to get offspring from the animal, and it's going to elevate your collection. But it could also be bad, because if you don't have the experience of dealing with breeding and with people, it could cause issues there. When I was, younger in my career, I did a collaboration with another breeder, and the terms weren't set in stone as they should have in the very beginning, and it wasn't somebody I was very familiar with. We just kind of did it because we knew each other in the hobby, and they had an animal I liked, and I had animals they liked, and we did it. But it ended up turning not the best. But nowadays, and that shut me off for a lot of years. I haven't done a collaboration for a long time. But nowadays, I'm more willing to do one because because I see how it could also elevate. It could elevate the game and elevate the animals that are being produced, because I see some of the people that are in our hobby that have like produced some of the nicest geckos ever is from collaborations, because you're not going to want to sell your best animal, and I'm not going to want to sell my best animal. So if we come together, we could create some insane looking animals. So that's the good part about it.
Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head too, like holdbacks, right? Like that's another whole different part of breeding. Also too is like holding back your best animals. And it's to me this year it's been a hard process. Like I'll start feeding, and then after like a couple feedings, I'll mark this animal. Okay, I want to hold this animal, and then I'll feed a couple more, and then okay, I want to hold this animal. Do you have a process on like how you deal with holdbacks, or it's just whatever catches your eye at that moment?
Yeah. So obviously, the the great part about breeding is that you get first dibs on
First dibs,
all the
yeah.
animals you produce. So I have, obviously, if I see something that out of the egg catches my eye, or even something that I didn't notice at first, but then one day I open up the enclosure and I'm like, oh damn, I get to hold that animal back. And I will typically hold animals at this point. I hold animals that kind of like meet all the requirements for me. So they have the pattern I want, they have the color I want, they have the structure I want, or at the very least, they have a really, really good quality that I want to inject into my other projects. So that's a good part about it, that you could do that. And, you know, a couple years back, I wasn't doing the best because I was just selling everything. I was selling some of my holdbacks. I was just like selling.
Mm,
And it's good and it's bad. It's good because you make the temporary money and in that way, but it's also bad because it kind of like holds you back a generation from what you should be, like in terms of like the level where crested geckos or whatever kind of gecko or animal you're breeding is like,
mhm.
as you have to resist that urge to sell some of your holdbacks, even if they're offering you, an insane amount of money that you might think is really good at the moment, because that holdback might be a cornerstone animal for your future generations. So that was a mistake I made a little bit ago, maybe like a couple of years ago. But this year, I'm like, I flipped it on reverse. I'm like, now I'm holding back so many things that
Yeah.
I'm growing everything out, and I'm seeing, okay, for sure I'm gonna hold this back, and for sure I don't need this. But I'm like, I like doubled down on like holding back this year, basically.
And you know what? And I think um, it's a win-win situation when you hold back, because even if you hold back more than what you need, the animal's gonna grow. Yeah, you're feeding it, but the value of the animal is definitely gonna go up. So if you decide, okay, no, I have a double, I don't need one of these animals. This one looks better than this one. You can still sell it, and be profitable too on the business side of it and stuff. And then
Yep, that's a
put
very
that
good point.
put that animal out into the community too for somebody else, because I'm pretty sure you've had those animals you've probably raised. At what age do crested geckos breed?
Typically about a year and a half to 2 years.
a year and a half, 2 years. So like let's say you raise something for a year, right? And you release it. I'm pretty sure some of that stuff gets sold quick.
Yeah.
Somebody was just waiting for you to release something like that, right?
Yeah, of course. And it just gives more time for the animal to develop its colors, its patterns, and it's closer to breeding weight, which a lot of people that buy from me and a lot of our customers are ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We're reptile breeders are also reptile customers.
Customers.
So
Yeah.
so a lot of people like that because it's an animal that's bigger and they don't have to grow it out, they don't have to wait as long.
Yep, very true. Yeah, that's a very hot. I mean, I've gotten even myself. I've gotten multiple messages this year on IG. Do you have any sub-adult or adult females? You know, me starting
Yeah.
off, I have nothing that I'm letting go. Especially
Yeah,
my
yeah, yeah.
sub-adult stuff. But yeah, that's an interesting point of view on holdbacks. Um,
Hmm.
and then we'll say with like your grow outs and stuff like that, do you ever sell like proven breeders and stuff like that, or do you usually keep them?
So I do very rarely, like recently, I've been selling more proven breeders because, like I was telling you earlier, I'm focusing more on the quality and not the quantity. So I've been selling more proven breeders, but generally, if an animal's ready to breed and it's an animal that I really like, there's no reason to sell it. This doesn't make sense. If I grew it out this whole time and waited all this time for it to be full grown, I'm gonna breed it. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it just depends on the type of animals. But sometimes it's just animals that you know you put up on the website, they don't sell, and then before you know it, that animal's like 30 grams or whatever, and then it's like, oh, it's closer to breeding weight now, and now it looks way better.
Hmm.
So you know, then you decide what you're gonna do from there. But depends.
Yeah. 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 With the hognose stuff, like sometimes in a lot of snakes, it's like, I mean, a lot of reptiles. Once it starts shedding and it grows, like the colors develop. It just looks so much better than what it
Yeah,
did when it first came out the egg. So I
yeah,
think that's another pretty cool thing about reptiles, where like the more the transformation goes through as they grow.
yep,
It's really cool.
yep.
Yeah, man. We're basically at the end of the podcast. Was there any topic you think we didn't cover, or that you wanted to tell anybody that's viewing, any maybe future people that are looking to get animals from you and stuff like that?
No, my all my social media is Tiki's Geckos, and my website is tikisgeckos.com. If you're interested in any of the animals that we breed, just check us out there. But that's all. Yeah.
Yep. I have your link tree in the description too. So guys, if you guys are watching this on the replay or now live, you can go on the link tree, and he has all his social media, website, and stuff like that. So it's easy to get to. Thank you again for being on the podcast. It was a great conversation. It's funny because like I've seen you at a couple shows, and like I said, I know I wanted to have you on, especially with you and Eslin having a history and stuff like that. I've heard good things from you about you from Eslin too. Where like I wanted to have this conversation on the podcast and like be fresh. I didn't want to
Yeah.
repeat all these questions, stuff like that. So I'm
Yeah.
glad we had this conversation on the podcast, and letting us into your world and stuff like that. Um, the way I close out my show, the last question I asked all my guests is, if you had 5 minutes to speak to the whole world and you had their attention, what would you say to them?
Oh boy, the whole world.
The whole world,
Buy more
man.
Crested Geckos. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I guess I would say that it's okay to have differences, and that doesn't mean that you have to be an enemy of each other. And there's a different way to go about things instead of just being conflictive and argumentative all the time. Especially now, and with internet and social media, there's so much polarization that people don't meet eye to eye, and they think the opposite side's the devil because of they disagree with my views. So that's what I would say.
Okay. Yeah, I agree, man. I think our world is built on diversity and the differences of people. Like, and like you said, we're getting to some points where we're letting the differences, instead of being a positive, become a negative.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good message, man. Again, thank you, guys. Thank you for coming on. Everybody that stuck with us this whole show. Thank you for stopping by. And if you have any other questions, hit the comment below. And then just keep supporting us. Make sure you guys hit my link tree. Follow us on all social media: Instagram, TikTok, here on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. Go to subscribe to David's channel too. So, he's got some good gecko and other species videos on there too. Um, Stay back real quick. I just want to say good night to everybody, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. We have Western Hognose breeder coming on, and I think you guys are going to want to see this one. All right, good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks.